They're schemers. Schemers trying to control their little worlds. I'm not a schemer. When the chips are down, these civilized people, they'll eat each other. And here we go.
Well, hello there. How is everyone? I hope you are all well on this stupendous Sunday. That's it, baby. It's Sunday, the day of rest, the day where we all have a day off. Are you having a day off? I'm not having a day off. Justice never sleeps, as I say, and you're looking absolutely amazing, I must add. And in this video, which is video 1 of 2, that's it, 1 of 2, the live will now be tomorrow night, Monday evening, not Sunday evening. So keep your eyes peeled for that as we start to discuss these documents that have come out in the aftermath of Bryan Kohberger's sentencing. But in this video, we're talking about none other than Brett the Midget Payne. He was the lead investigator in the Idaho 4 case. And there's been some movements around Brett the Midget Payne. And we're going to talk about that in a second. But first of all, we have to think about the investigation itself and how well did the investigation go. Some people say the investigation went absolutely fantastic. Of course it did. Look at where we have a guy who has admitted to the crime. He's literally admitted to the crime. Let's talk about it, because I'm not the only one who has questions about this entire situation. And for this reason, we're going to head over to none other than Megyn Kelly. Now, I've not always agreed with things that Megyn Kelly has said, but she has herself raised questions. And you know the drill, I have to periodically stop it so we don't get struck down with furious anger. But listen to what Megyn Kelly questions and listen to Brett Payne himself answer what should be a very simple question and how he could have cleared this entire situation up. And in fact, the fact that he doesn't clear it up the way that you would have expected him to proves that that's not the case here, which would have made, in fact, the most sense. Let's talk about it in a sec.
I've got some questions about what the Idaho cops are saying. I really do. I'm not entirely sure what's going on here. And I'll show you what I'm talking about. So they had a presser right after the Kohberger hearing on Wednesday happened and finally answered some questions, which they haven't done at all.
It's true, isn't it? They haven't answered any questions really whatsoever. And with these new documents coming out, these documents that everybody had so much faith that they were going to answer questions, they in fact raise questions. Now, we do learn a bit of stuff, which I'm going to talk about after this as well, with respect of the initial conversation with Bryan Kohberger, because we knew there was an initial conversation that seemed to be okay, and then something happened that would lead Bryan Kohberger to take the fifth. But here we go.
And the first one related to, do you remember when the crime first happened, they put out a statement saying this was a targeted crime and that the community in Moscow, Idaho did not need to worry? And everyone had questions like, well, how do you know that? You don't have anybody in custody. You don't have a suspect. So how can you speak to what was in his head, that it was targeted? Like, what are you talking about? And that question came up on Wednesday. Watch here in SOT 80.
Now, before we listen to what they say, like, my thought processes here, what they could have literally said was, look, when you've got a load of people, you've got a load of students, we've got the university, and we've got this heinous crime, and everyone's scared, everyone's on tenterhooks, the best thing that we can say in that moment is, look, this is targeted, this is isolated to try and stop everybody panicking, everybody worrying. Now, if they'd have stood here now and said that, look, that was what we believed in our infancy of the case, and this isn't something that they deal with brilliantly. You know, this is not also something that they deal with a lot. You know, maybe they could have just turned around and been honest. But the fact that Well, I don't know whether they're being honest. Are they being honest or are they not being honest? And why is this question so difficult? And this just goes to prove what a shit show this really is.
Chief, from the very beginning, your department was saying this was a targeted attack. Can you now say who was the target and what's your evidence to show that?
I'll turn that question over to the investigators to answer that one.
Yeah, I'm not answering that, bruv. I'm not answering that, brother. I'm going to get someone else to.
Well, I think Darren and I have, the evidence suggests that there was a reason that this particular house was chosen. What that reason is, we don't know. We don't know who the target was, and we're not going to speculate on that up here today. But we can tell you that for whatever reason, Mr. Kohberger chose that residence. Perhaps it's the location, layout, we don't know. But that's, to the best of my knowledge, that's what that statement likely...
Location, just off a student campus, surrounded by houses, surrounded by cameras, surrounded by cops that are literally everywhere with students walking about, and the layout of the house, the fucking most weirdest layout that perhaps you'll ever see in a property, and there's multiple cars outside that would seem to indicate that there's possibly copious amounts of students in this house. And someone reached out to me earlier, right, and we'll get back to this in a second, and this is a point that I raised previously, and that is, how did he know that he weren't going to walk in this house and there'd be 20, 30 people in there? And how did he know that they wouldn't have all been together, smoking, drinking? There was food literally being delivered to the property. How did you walk in there on your own and you've come face to face with a load of people staring back at you? Some of them fucking 6 foot odd football lads, and they've had a skinful, and they're like, well, who the fuck are you? That makes no fucking sense. Absolutely no sense whatsoever. But anyway, let's see.
led to.
Okay, that is a chicken shit remark. I'm sorry. That is ridiculous. That's a CYA cop right there. That's what's happening. They said it was targeted, I assume, because they wanted to keep the panic level down. But sorry, that's not your job. Your job is to tell the truth. If there was reason to panic, then you need to let the community know that. There was a killer on the loose who just murdered 4 people in the span of 12 minutes. And you had no business saying that it was targeted and like suggesting people didn't need to worry. Kids did need to worry. We had no idea in those initial moments and days who the killer was or whether he was going to target somebody else. I get it.
And there you go. There you have it, isn't it? But anyway, look, off the back end of this, because you can then argue, so we've got law enforcement that weren't perhaps doing the best job and perhaps they lied to the public. Now, again, in the aftermath of this, the most decent thing to do, if they indeed said it was targeted as everything, just to chill people out, then why would you just not stand up there and say that? Look, we had mass panic. People were worried. People were concerned. And we didn't want people to panic and potentially put themselves in increased danger by making, decisions that could have made things worse. Do you know what I mean? Because there's a lot of, it could have been causing people to carry weapons to protect themselves that could have resulted. There's loads of things. But the fact that they didn't even address that, didn't even say that, I think that's a telltale sign. But what we now hear is that Brett Payne, he no longer works with the police. He's no longer actually working in law enforcement whatsoever. And who's he working for? He's working for none other than Scott Green, the University of Idaho. Why would somebody, right, a cop of all people, someone who's he's been in the military, he's a military man, fuck knows what he was doing, the size of him, I don't know whether they had him so he could crawl into really small places and sneak up on people, who fuck knows. But the fact that he was military, he then goes from military, he goes into the cops, and then all of a sudden he's involved in this case, which he was the lead investigator, caught the bad guy, got cop of the year, and then works for a university. Non-law enforcement role. What the fuck is that about? I'm telling you what that's about. The only fucking thing that makes sense here is money. Money. The money. So why would the university offer this guy who done such a good job in the law enforcement role and done what he needed to do, cop of the air, offer him a non-law enforcement role within the university and offer him a substantial sum of money, which must have been a substantial sum of money, because you're not going to walk away from that for less money, are you? Not going to work in it for less money. That's just me speculating. Obviously, there could have been other reasons. Who knows? Maybe the trauma of this case, maybe the toll that talking shit took on him. Who knows? I'm just trying to make sense of it all. But look, let me know what you think. Let me know what you think down below. But look, I was reading something that was talking about Brian Kohberger's first interview. And we always knew that he had a discussion. He seemed to be open to have a discussion. And he seemingly was open to have a discussion. And he had asked why he had indeed been arrested. You know, and it got to the point where they said, yes, we've arrested you because we need to discuss the murders that happened over in Moscow, Idaho. And it was at that point that Brian Kohberger would turn around and say, well, respectfully, this is the point where I think I need to get myself a lawyer, and takes the fifth. But it's interesting that even at the beginning of that conversation, Brian Kohberger seemed to not understand why he had specifically been arrested. And maybe it was when he talked about potentially saying, had anybody else been arrested? Again, all of these things to me, you know, if you're thinking about Brian Kohberger in the sense that he would have known he left the knife sheath, he would have known that he left an eyewitness, so why would he really be that surprised that he got, you know, he'd have seen his car on camera? Would he have been that surprised? I don't know. Let me know down below what you think. But there you go, Brett Payne being called out by Megyn Kelly for talking shit and lying to the public, and the university have employed him now. What a turnaround. Can you say bought and paid for? Do it 10 times. Love you all. Mwah.